starfish?
G'day Earthlings, Dr. Rank here, and welcome to Gaming Legends, the show that takes the ick out of ichthyology. In Finding Nemo, the video game, you play as a widower voyaging across the Queensland coastline to rescue his handicapped son from a dentist. The devs intend for you to collect several sizzles of shiny seashells by the seafloor, but I personally feel a little guilty stealing from snails. Can you beat Finding Nemo without collecting shells? No, you can't, but we're gonna try anyway. Our primary objective for this run is to beat each level with as low a shell score as possible. If we accidentally collect a shell and it's not required to finish the level, we must immediately restart the level and try again. I initially wanted to make this a single segment run, but I only had one free save file and I wanted to keep the other two for speedruns, shameless plug. So instead, we'll do a low score run of each individual level, with our final total being the sum of best. Plus, as a bonus challenge, we're going to collect as many of the game's 60 golden starfish as we possibly can, without adding on any extra shells. Without further ado, let's dive into the run. Going to School is the tutorial level, and it's surprisingly uneventful. Not a single shell is found anywhere in the main path. There is one asterisk with the combat tutorial though. Enemies in this game are defeated by trapping them with bubbles and then darting into them before they escape. Normally this causes them to leave behind a circle of shells, which can become increasingly hazardous. Fortunately, the colorblind programmer at Traveler's Tales made a special exception for the two required clams in this level. On the first playthrough of Going to School, and only on the first playthrough, defeating enemies produces no shells whatsoever, letting us finish the level with a perfect score of 0. We can also get all 3 starfish from this level by swimming through all the bubble rings, carrying all 3 pebbles to their matching platforms, and winning the race against Tad, Sheldon, and Pearl. Earning any starfish from a level unlocks its bonus level, which gives an additional starfish upon completion. In this case, the goal is to bounce the Luxo ball through all the hoops. Shells never appear within bonus levels, so every single one is possible as long as it's accessible. I'm going to preemptively add 18 starfish to the total, but if a bonus level proves inaccessible, I will subtract 1. Field Trip retains the bubble ring and pebble bonuses, as well as 2 new starfish. The hero bonus is awarded for defeating every single enemy in the level, which inevitably leaves a shell trap behind. But the shells take a moment to officially spawn, so if you kill the enemy and then immediately start moving in the opposite direction, you can escape the shells. And if you swim far enough away, the shells will despawn, making them a non-issue. The bounce bonus, meanwhile, is awarded for stepping on every single tile during a bouncing section. Several of these sea sponges have shells resting on top of them, making this the first impossible starfish of the run. It is technically possible to collect the starfish, restart from the pause menu, and reset the shell score to 0 while still keeping the starfish in your inventory. But what kind of cheater do you think I am? A shell is a shell! We also have to watch out for shell rings in the 3D sections, as they automatically add 600 points to the shell score if you swim through one. The final 2D section is our first major roadblock. In order to get past these walls, you need to go through the caves in the background, which you may notice have shells in them. There aren't any known out-of-bounds glitches in this game, which means shells are required to beat this level. Thankfully, we can at least control the damage. The first shell is worth 10 points, but every consecutive shell you grab adds 10 to its point value. If we collect the first shell outside the cave, then wait a second before pressing the action button, we can shave a few points off our shell score. That makes 170 shells needed to beat Field Trip with the bubble ring bonus and hero bonus. But what about the pebble bonus? The pebbles start off in separate rooms from their platforms and must be transported through some narrow currents to rectify this. We need to backtrack through the caves to deposit the red and green pebbles, but the caves were programmed on non-Euclidean duct tape. Each cave entrance sends Nemo to a specific exit, which itself leads to an entirely different exit. The any percent route through the level uses exactly 2 cave entrances, and using any more will always cost extra shells. Fortunately, there's one other way around this. If we spare the final clam, we can use it to kill ourselves and respawn by the red pebble platform. Dying resets Nemo's location and nothing else, so we can grab the red pebble and put it in place, then do the same with the green. There is a big cluster of shells just before the checkpoint, but if you stick to the surface, you should be able to clear it. We finished Field Trip with 3 out of 4 starfish and 170 shells, and somehow managed to beat the bonus level on our first try. If only that would happen in a speed run. The next level is the drop-off.
The drop-off?
We can get past the vertical lines of shells by going over them, but there's another extra long shell trail that slopes downwards. We have just barely enough space to squeeze under them. We can also go over via the surface, but this is less viable while carrying pebbles. The blue pebble platform is absolutely covered in shells, but if you aim properly, you should be able to drop it on. The 3D section of the anchor chain does technically have shells, but all of them are actively out of the way. The same cannot be said for the shell rings during the diver chase, but there's only 4 of them, and they always appear immediately after Dr. Sherman swipes his hand. We easily cleared the level with 3 out of 3 starfish and 0 shells. Mask Chase is our first Marlin level, and his hitbox is bigger than Nemo's, making it harder to squeeze past shells. This makes the vertical line of shells above the red pebble platform harder to deal with, but if you release the pebble mid-movement, you can go for a 3-pointer. There's also a few enemies that can only be trapped using bubble trails. They turn into a regular bubble if you swim into them in order, but if there's no enemies nearby, it will burst into shells instead. This is only an issue when backtracking, but it's worth keeping an eye out for. Make sure you hug the wall as you go down the final current, and you should be able to clear with 3 out of 3 starfish and 0 shells. All the shells in Catch Dory are inside cave shortcuts, all of which are completely optional and slower anyway. Catch her 3 times to get a perfect 1 out of 1 starfish, 0 shell clear. Unfortunately, our streak ends in the minefield. We can easily dodge the shell rings in the 3D sections, but the bounce bonus is another story. The fastest route goes through several lines of shells which run between mines, which we are forced to collect in their entirety with all the consecutiveness that comes with it. Not to mention this single shell that we just barely graze. Overall, this level costs us a whopping 1,090 shells and only lets us leave with the bubble ring bonus, 1 out of 2 starfish. We then have the hardest level in the game casually, Submarine. The first 2D section is easy enough, but the second is thrice as long with no checkpoints. There's a bubble trail that you have to pass through at least 3 times to get the pebble bonus, but as long as you steer clear of the middle bubbles, it shouldn't be a problem. Make sure you hug the post here to avoid the vertical line of shells. There's an extremely narrow space with shells at the last button, but you can safely avoid them by swimming slowly. After that, the rest of the level is entirely shellless, letting us finish with 3 out of 3 starfish. Also, I finished the slide puzzle faster than the current 80% record because I found a solution that uses 2 less moves. Hide and Seek is a bit of a break level, tasking us with finding all the tank gang members. Only 2 of them pose a threat to the run. The cutscene after finding Bubbles, which is also required for the blue pebble, drops you directly on top of a shell. If you hold right immediately, you can just barely escape it. The other offender is Gurgle, who is hiding inside Mount Wanahockaloogie. The only way in is through this narrow passage guarded by 4 shells. Thankfully, you can squeeze past the first one very easily, move slowly to reduce their values, and if you save Gurgle to last, you won't have to worry about getting out again. We finish with 2 out of 2 starfish and 30 shells. Immediately after is Mask Search, which has the unique gimmick of swapping characters. Dory can push heavier obstacles, while Marlin has a smaller hitbox. To get Marlin on the other side of the first pipe, he has to go through this exit on the right. The smaller pipe on the left has 3 shells, but the larger vertical pipe has 6 hidden shells bunched together. The former is less costly, so we'll be taking that route. After opening the door with Marlin, we need to get Dory over to legally trigger the next checkpoint. Sadly, Dory's exit has 2 more shells that she just barely grazes. The second segment has a few shells blocking the intersections between pipes. Luckily, Marlin and Dory's hitboxes don't cover their tails or dorsal fins, letting us just barely squeeze past them and grab all the bubble rings. Unfortunately, the slide puzzle has a shell in front of each tile, and several of those tiles are required to move. The faster solution thankfully only uses 7 of the 9 spaces, so our score only goes up by 70. The third segment is where things get really interesting. Not only can we finish off the hero bonus, but this is also where the pebble bonus happens. When carrying a pebble, Marlon and Dory always turn to face the camera, effectively shrinking their horizontal hitboxes and making it easier to squeeze past the shells. This lets us avoid the shells in the middle of intersections, as well as this shell at the end of Marlon's route. Though we do still need to get 2 shells in this intersection, as well as 2 more to unclog the upper pipe. Make sure not to deposit the red pebble until the last trip with Dory, and you should be able to get 3 out of 3 starfish with 160 shells. Anglerfish Chase has a single shell ring in the center of the screen at the start. If you avoid that, you can easily get 1 out of 1 starfish with 0 shells. Mount Wanahockaloogie has some shells in the Tiki Hut at the end of the 3D section. Luckily, you can completely avoid them by aiming for the roof. The bigger problem though is the first 2D area. In order to remove the lava bubbles blocking the path, we have to blow into the tiki heads in the correct order. I tried going over it, but Traveler's Tales already thought of that. Each head will only work when the corresponding leak has been blocked by a rock. Unfortunately, the second rock is absolutely covered in shells, making it impossible to get a clean dart. We unfortunately have to settle for a pathetic 10 shells, but at least we can get 1 out of 1 starfish from the bubble rings. Then we get to Jellyfish Race. Unlike the race bonus in going to school, winning both races in this level is required to finish it. Dory is, of course, significantly faster than Marlon. The intended solution is to use the jellyfish to get a speed boost, but this puts you in a predetermined trajectory, usually straight through a shell ring. You can cancel a jellyfish boost by darting or just not pressing the action button at all, but both are incredibly slow and inconsistent options. But I've got good news. The jellyfish are entirely optional. If you mash the move button, you'll swim forward significantly faster than if you hold it. Since Dory is programmed to only hold the move button and only uses very specific jellyfish, you can easily overtake her while still safely dodging every shell ring. The level isn't completely clean though, as the bounce bonus in the middle has several shells on its tiles, some of which are on the required path. We finish with 1 out of 2 starfish and 20 shells. Training with Gil offers a top-down perspective, with the goal being to follow Gil to the next task. Gil's path happens to pass through several shells, and while avoiding them isn't impossible, it does slow us down, especially when we miss the speed rings. It is actually possible to overtake Gil, but if you don't go back for the speed rings within a few seconds, the game fails you anyway. The later top-down sections are more interesting, as the shells we missed earlier become obstacles here. But with a little precision and a ton of button mashing, we can clear with 1 out of 1 starfish and 0 shells. East Australian Current has several shell trails in the opening segment, but there's always a path to weave around them, especially since you can actually push the turtles around. Once you reach the first checkpoint, there are no shells for the rest of the level. This means we can finally finish the bounce bonus for once, earning 2 out of 2 starfish. The plan tasks us with bringing 5 pebbles back to the filter. The leftmost pebble is on the other side of a shell wall, but that wall doesn't extend all the way up. The rightmost pebble, however, is more troublesome, as it's on the deck of the shipwreck. The mast acts as a wall for this area, and it's too tall to jump over like a flippin' little dolphin. We have to use the intended path through the hull, which automatically gives us 150 points worth of shells. On the bright side, we can release the Loxo ball while we're here, earning 2 out of 2 starfish. Whale Chase once again has shells in the bounce bonus, but this time some of those shells overlap with bubble rings, making the bubble ring bonus impossible. There's thankfully a shell-less route along the right side of the tongue, though you will need to dodge multiple squishies to get there. Yes, that is their official name. After dodging every shell ring in the esophagus, we have quite possibly the 2 hardest 2D areas in the whole game. This first hermit crab has shells next to it on both sides. The safest way to kill it is to wait for it to jump before trapping it. You'll also need to keep an eye out for the current that constantly pushes you forwards. Just a brief lapse in concentration is enough to send you straight into a shell. Just before the checkpoint is a line of shells that Dory can just barely squeeze under. Once you clear out the last hermit crab, there's an even tighter squeeze past these shells. Just hold down and slightly left, and you should be able to get through it. Dodge the last few shell rings during the race, and you should just barely clear with 3 out of 5 starfish and 0 shells. Our final roadblock is Treatment Plant, with currents way too strong for a clownfish to counter, and several shells littered among them. You can escape most of them by hugging the walls, including the top of this area here, which you have to go through multiple times to get all the bubble rings. There's a grate we have to pass through to get to the right side, and we have to dart across the current to get there. This leaves you liable to grab multiple shells as you venture through. Luckily, if you only dart once, you can just barely make it in and squeeze past along the bottom without grabbing any shells. Immediately after the 3D section is a shell trail that covers the entire path. Even with his tiny hitbox, Nemo can't squeeze past them, forcing us to collect one of them. There's also 2 shell trails just before the pebbles. If you hug the top wall, you'll take the turn too wide and hit one of the shells on the second trail. But by swimming against the current, you can slow down long enough to change walls. In the end, we finish with 3 out of 3 starfish and 10 shells. All the shells in Fishing Net Rescue are on the ocean floor, and we never have to go there at all, letting us close out the final level with 1 out of 1 starfish and 0 shells. With Dory finally learning how to swim down, the Finding Nemo minimum shells run ends with a grand total of 1,640 shells and 55 out of 60 starfish collected. If you want to watch the run, you can check out the archive footage on the end card, as well as my speedruns of the game in both any percent and 100%. I still have the uncontested record in the latter, so it'd be nice to see literally anyone else try it. And if you want more Pixar game challenges, I've also done the PS2 versions of WALL-E and Cars, which you can also check out with the cards. That's all for now, and I will see you down under.